Elvis Presley, often called the King of Rock and Roll, was no stranger to the glitz and glamour of fame. His concerts were legendary, his voice unmistakable, and his presence magnetic. Yet, beneath the surface of a world full of adoration and attention, there existed a man who at times struggled with deep loneliness. What does it mean to have the world adore you, but still feel empty inside? This was a question that echoed through the halls of Elvis's heart long before he would discover the profound power of music as a healer. One evening, behind the curtains of a sold-out concert, Elvis stood alone in the dimly lit dressing room, the cacophony of the crowd's cheers still ringing in his ears. His reflection in the mirror seemed distant, a stranger wearing the face of a superstar. He had just performed one of the most powerful sets of his career, yet something inside him felt hollow. As he stared at himself, the weight of his fame bore down on him. "What am I really doing here?" he wondered. The thought felt like a weight in his chest, pulling him into a moment of self-doubt. This wasn't the first time Elvis had felt like this. The bright lights of fame had brought him everything he ever dreamed of: wealth, admiration, and success. But the price of fame had been high: the pressure to perform, the constant scrutiny, and the emptiness that lingered when the applause faded. These were the realities he faced in silence. His music, once his source of joy, had become a lifeline, yet he found himself questioning if it was enough to fill the emotional void that gnawed at him. Little did Elvis know this very moment of uncertainty would soon ignite a revelation that would forever alter his relationship with music and the world. As he looked into the mirror, he would begin to realize that music wasn't just a career, it was a profound gift that had the power to heal not only himself but others as well. It was in this vulnerable state that Elvis would come to understand something far more significant than fame or success: the human need for connection and the unspoken power of empathy that his music could offer. Elvis Presley's life was a study in contrasts. On one hand, he was the quintessential rock star, the epitome of success and adoration. He lived in mansions, drove luxurious cars, and had the kind of fame that few could ever fathom. Fans would scream his name, and the world would watch as he performed on stage, electrifying the audience with every note. Yet, behind the applause and flashing cameras, Elvis was a man often alone with his thoughts. Fame had placed him on a pedestal, but it had also isolated him in ways he hadn't expected. The bright lights of Las Vegas and the buzz of his Hollywood career had initially promised a life of excitement and fulfillment. But as the years wore on, the truth began to settle in. Elvis was exhausted, not just physically but emotionally. He had been on stage countless times, but each time he felt a part of himself slipping away. The demands of fame, the pressure to perform, and the constant public gaze were draining. Despite the adoration of millions, Elvis often found himself in a constant state of unrest, caught between the persona he had created for the world and the man he longed to be in private. In interviews, he would often speak about the loneliness he felt, a sentiment that was echoed in his music. Songs like Heartbreak Hotel and In the Ghetto weren't just melodies, they were the raw reflection of his inner turmoil. He had everything anyone could want: wealth, fame, and influence, but somehow he still felt like something was missing. It was as if the more he gave of himself on stage, the more disconnected he became from his true self. Elvis's vulnerabilities, though hidden behind a charismatic smile, were clear to those close to him. Friends and family knew that he was struggling to find meaning in his life. He was constantly looking for something deeper, something that could fill the emptiness he couldn't quite explain. Yet he often felt trapped by the expectations that had been placed upon him. He was supposed to be the king of rock, the untouchable idol, but behind closed doors he was just a man seeking purpose, desperately yearning to feel seen for who he truly was. In private moments, Elvis would sit alone with his guitar, the one constant companion that never judged him. It was in these moments of solitude that he began to wrestle with questions that had been growing inside him for years. Was he just a performer, or could his music be something more? Could his art, the thing that had brought him so much attention, actually serve a higher purpose? This period of self-reflection would mark the beginning of a profound internal transformation for Elvis. His music, once an outlet for expression, would soon become a means of connection. He began to realize that his greatest gift was not the fame or wealth he had amassed, but the ability to touch the hearts of others through his voice. This realization, though painful, would eventually lead him to a deeper understanding of his role as a musician, a healer, and a man of empathy. The silence backstage was deafening as Elvis stood by the door, moments before stepping back onto the stage for yet another performance. His heart raced, not from excitement, but from a deep, unsettling feeling he couldn't shake. The audience was waiting, the lights were bright, and the familiar roar of anticipation was building. Yet, in this moment, Elvis felt utterly disconnected from it all. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath, trying to calm the growing turmoil inside him. The bright lights, the cheers, it all felt so distant, so hollow. As he stood there, memories of his early days flooded his mind, the days when music had been everything to him. Back then, it wasn't about fame or fortune. It was about the pure joy of creating something that spoke to his soul. But somewhere along the way, he had lost that connection. The man who had once sung with passion and authenticity now found himself questioning the very essence of his art. Had he become just another performer, playing to the crowd, feeding off their energy without truly connecting to it? A voice from the dressing room interrupted his thoughts. It was his longtime friend Red West, who had been with him through thick and thin. "You okay, Elvis?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. Elvis didn't immediately respond. His gaze drifted to the mirror once again, staring at the man who had become an icon, but who still felt deeply lost inside. "Red," he began, his voice barely above a whisper, "I don't know anymore. I'm just so tired. It's like I'm just going through the motions, and I don't feel anything." Red stepped closer, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You sip the king, man, you sip given the world everything. What sip's left for you?" Elvis paused, the question hanging in the air. It wasn't just a question of what was left for him in his career. It was a question of what was left for him as a person. What did it mean to be the king? If the very crown he wore weighed him down with a sense of isolation and emptiness. Red Sip's words lingered as Elvis took another deep breath. "I thought fame would fill me up," he said, his voice shaky, "but it sips like the more I give, the emptier I become." At that moment, the reality of what he was saying hit him like a wave. Fame, adoration, the applause, none of it had filled the emptiness inside. He had given the world his music, but in return he had received little more than the expectations of a man who was always on, the pressure to perform, to be perfect, to never falter. It had all become too much. The silence that followed felt heavy, like the weight of the world was pressing down on him. Elvis had spent so many years in the spotlight, but in this moment he realized just how far he had drifted from his true self. Music, once his sanctuary, had become something to be packaged and presented. But what if there was more to it than that? What if the music was meant to heal, to reach into the hearts of others in ways he hadn't yet understood? With a sudden clarity, Elvis knew that he needed to rediscover his true purpose, not just as a performer, but as a human being. His art could no longer be a means to an end. It had to be a means of connection. And if he could connect with his audience on a deeper level, perhaps he could finally begin to heal himself as well. As the band struck the first few chords of "Can't Help Falling in Love," Elvis stepped onto the stage, the familiar roar of the crowd greeting him like an old friend. But this time, something was different. The lights that once blinded him now felt like a spotlight revealing the truth. He wasn't just standing in front of thousands of adoring fans. He was standing on the precipice of something far more significant. A revelation had begun to take shape in his mind, one that had been building in the silence between songs, in the private moments of reflection, in the conversation with Red. He was not just a performer. He was a vessel of emotion, a messenger whose music could heal, if only he could connect with it again on a deeper level. The song began to unfold. the lyrics wrapping around him like a warm embrace. As his voice rose with each verse, Elvis's mind flashed back to the early days of his career, when music was his escape, his solace. He remembered how it felt to sing from the heart, how the music spoke directly to his soul and to the hearts of others. It wasn't about the fame, the fortune, or the applause. It was about the shared experience of human emotion. He could feel it now as his voice carried across the room, reverberating in the hearts of the audience. He wasn't just singing to them, he was singing for them, with them. For the first time in years, Elvis felt the connection he had been missing. The song was no longer a performance. It was an offering. Each note, each word was a piece of himself given to the audience. As the song built to its crescendo, Elvis's heart swelled with a newfound understanding of his role. His music wasn't just entertainment, it was medicine for the soul. It could bring healing, peace, and comfort to those who needed it most. As he reached the final chorus, the room seemed to hold its breath, and for a moment it was as if time stood still. Elvis's voice, filled with vulnerability and emotion, echoed through the arena. The realization hit him hard, like a sudden wave crashing onto the shore. This was his purpose. He was not just an entertainer, he was a healer. The applause that followed was deafening, but it was the silence between the notes that had made the difference. It was in that silence that Elvis understood the true power of his art. When the song ended, the crowd erupted in applause, but Elvis stood still for a moment, his eyes closed, allowing the weight of the moment to wash over him. He had found something in that song, a truth, a connection that he had been searching for all along. It wasn't about the adoration, it was about the impact his music could have on others. And in that instant he knew that his music could heal, not just his own wounds, but the wounds of those who listened. In the weeks and months that followed that pivotal performance, Elvis's approach to music and life began to shift dramatically. The realization he had come to on stage wasn't just a fleeting thought. It was a fundamental change in how he viewed himself as an artist and as a human being. Music, he now understood, was more than just notes and rhythms. It was a form of emotional communication, a bridge between souls that transcended words. It was his chance to connect with others on a level deeper than fame or superficial adoration. His music wasn't simply about entertaining, it was about healing. This understanding began to manifest in the way he interacted with those around him. The vulnerability he had embraced on stage now spilled into his personal life. In conversations with friends and family, Elvis became more open about his struggles, more willing to acknowledge the emotional toll his career had taken on him. He no longer wore the facade of invulnerability that fame demanded. Instead, he showed up as a man who had learned to embrace his imperfections. One of the most profound changes was in his relationships with his fans. No longer did he feel as if he was a distant idol on a pedestal. Instead, he saw his fans as part of the journey, people who, like him, had experienced pain, loss, and longing. He began to understand the power of his music to bring comfort to those who were suffering, to provide solace to those who felt alone. He realized that his songs were not just a soundtrack to people's lives, they were a form of connection, a reminder that in the most profound ways, we are all in this together. This shift also affected his approach to performing. Elvis started to incorporate more personal, reflective moments into his shows. He would pause between songs to share his thoughts with the audience, offering glimpses of the man behind the persona. These moments weren't scripted or rehearsed. They came from the heart. Elvis began to speak about his struggles, his vulnerabilities, and the healing power of music, making his concerts more intimate and deeply emotional experiences. His connection with the audience became less about giving them a show and more about sharing a mutual, emotional experience. In his personal life, Elvis also began to prioritize relationships and emotional health. The pressures of fame still loomed over him, but he was no longer solely defined by them. He spent more time with his family, confided in those he trusted, and sought to heal the wounds of his past. His relationships with his loved ones deepened as he allowed himself to be more present, more human. Elvis had learned that in order to heal others, he first had to heal himself. Even as Elvis's career continued to soar, he carried with him the lessons he had learned in that vulnerable moment of realization. Music was no longer just a performance. It was a channel for empathy, a means of offering comfort and understanding to those who needed it most. He had found his true purpose, not just as an entertainer but as a healer, using his music to connect with others on a deeply emotional level. The impact of this transformation rippled through his career and personal life. Fans didn't just admire him for his voice or his charisma, they admired him for his authenticity, his willingness to share his soul through his music. Elvis's legacy would forever be defined not just by his records or performances, but by the emotional connection he forged with the world, a connection that transcended the superficialities of fame and touched the hearts of millions. Elvis Presley's journey was not just one of fame, fortune, and adoration. It was a journey of profound self-discovery, one that took him from the heights of superstardom to the depths of loneliness, and ultimately to a place of healing and connection. Through the struggles, the questions, and the realizations, Elvis came to understand something that few truly grasped: the transformative power of music. It was never just about hitting the high notes or perfecting the performance. It was about connecting to others in a way that transcended words, a way that reached into their hearts and offered something deeper. Through that pivotal moment backstage, when the weight of fame seemed unbearable, Elvis discovered that his true power lay in the empathy his music could provide. His voice, his art, became a bridge for others to cross, a means of emotional expression that helped heal not only his own wounds but the wounds of countless others. Music, in its purest form, became his medicine, a means of bringing comfort, understanding, and connection to those who needed it most. In the years that followed, Elvis's career and life took on a new dimension. He no longer viewed himself as just a performer, a king of rock and roll, but as a man who could offer something more: empathy, healing, and emotional depth through his art. His transformation showed that fame and success are fleeting, but the impact of human connection, of truly understanding and empathizing with others, is what leaves a lasting legacy. As we reflect on Elvis's journey, we are reminded that the power of music and art extends far beyond entertainment. It is a tool for healing, a way to connect, and a reminder that we are all part of a shared human experience. Take a moment to think about your own journey. How have you used art, music, or any form of expression to connect with others or to heal yourself? Have you ever had a moment when something you heard or saw shifted your perspective on life? We invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. How has empathy shaped your relationships, your career, or even your personal growth? Elvis's story is a testament to the timeless truth that music is more than just sound. It's a force that binds us together, heals us, and reminds us that we are not alone in our struggles. The next time you listen to a song, remember, it might not just be entertainment, it might be a lifeline, a bridge to someone else's heart.